Get those summer vacations in, folks, because we are only 40 days away from kickoff of the 2025 football season, week 0 in Dublin, Ireland, August 23rd. Only 40 days away. DPS All Football Talk podcast is next. Hello, folks. Welcome back to the DPS All Football Talk podcast. 40 days left edition here. And SEC Media Days cranked up today for, without a whole lot of controversy or except maybe Nick Saban is coming back to coach. We'll see. I'm going to let all the other podcasts out there talk about all that stuff. They can have it, right? So this is preview season. Right now, it is media day season. The season is just around the corner, and we'll be kicking this thing off, and no more speculation. But I thought I'd do one more speculation kind of podcast here to talk about is there any value left in the win total markets, right? So team win totals for the year, right? So that's it's a fun market that's somewhat new. I think it hasn't been around that many years, but over/under win totals for each team were announced, several months ago. The market is now mature on those. People have been betting those for months, and so some have adjusted up, some have adjusted down. I showed you all the latest numbers in a previous podcast about where many of the teams fall. But what we're going to do today is discuss Power 4 win totals. Is there any place where there's something that you might consider a best bet out there remaining now that everything is mature, right? Maybe you got into the market late, or maybe you're like me and you don't make a move on that kind of stuff until you start to read some of those magazines that have just come out over the last few weeks. Phil Steele and Athlon and all of those that have just come out. I mentioned the FBI got updated for the spring and everything. Maybe you don't want to make moves until that happens. That's what we did, and we have 5 teams to discuss today. Only 2 of them wound up being actual plays after we analyzed the data, and we're only doing the Power 4 here. I might have mentioned that. And what we're going to do here is show you our little analytical approach to how we determine these, what a play would be for the win totals. Is there an analytical approach you can use? I have my own approach that I'm going to show you guys. You can come up with your own. This information is all out there. All the information that I used is out there. This is the one case where I'm not using DPS data to make 100%, not using DPS data 100% to make a play decision. Last year, going into the 2024 season, we tried out a method of doing a simulation, and then we did a few win total projections, some bets based on that simulation. Turned out to be disastrous. We only got one right out of, I think it was 8 or 9 that we placed bets on. We lost a lot of money in the win total market, as did a lot of other people too. As I'll show you in the week 1 podcast that's coming up. We will, we are actually, the public is actually not very good at this stuff either. So I'm going to show you that when we get to the week one. But right now, I just want to show you this little analytical approach that we came up with. You know, we like to do to not. We don't like to speculate with the DPS. It's an analytics. It's a hobby, analytics hobby. We don't speculate. We don't make opinions. There are plenty of podcasts out there, very good podcasts out there that you. I mention this all the time on my podcast. There are lots and lots of good people who can analyze talent and determine who's going to be better this year, who's going to be worse this year. So we are leveraging their expertise in this case. Every other case, we use only our own data, right, which is based on box score statistics. Obviously, it's the preseason. We don't have any box score statistics, so we don't have anything we can leverage right now. So we are leveraging other people's work. In this case, all except for one factor that I'm going to talk to you about. So basically, win totals for those not familiar. FanDuel it usually leads the market. Sometime around April or May or something. They come out with a win total projection for each team. And I'm only going to focus on Power 4 today. There's 68 Power 4 teams. They come out with 68 numbers that say, for example, let's say Clemson, right? Clemson's going to win 9.5 games. So you can bet Clemson to go over that number. You can bet Clemson to go under that number. One of the numbers will be juiced, meaning they're trying to coerce you not to bet that number, to bet the opposite side to get 50% on each side. They're trying, too many people are betting in one particular way, so they'll juice that particular way to try to get people to move back the other direction, right? So, and that's as I said, this market is mature right now. So people have been doing this for months, right? And podcasts that I listen to have put out their best bets on who they think is going to go over their number, who they think is going to go below their number. And in our case, we've done the same thing, but we try to use a new method, a little analytical method that, basically with three variables in it, right? So, so one of those variables is going to be schedule strength, and that is something that's a little bit controversial on how you come up with schedule strength. This is 80% leveraged schedule strength. I don't use somebody's particular number on schedule strength, but I use their power ranking projections to determine what I think their schedule strength is going to be. That's one variable that you use, schedule strength. Second variable is what is the current over-under number compared to how many wins they had last year, right? So remember, over-unders are for regular season wins. They don't include conference championship games. They don't include bowl games. They are just regular season wins. So the second variable that I use is how much over or under their predicted win total is for this year compared to what they did last year, right? So that's the second variable. So you have what the consensus schedule strength is, what their number is compared to what their over-under win total number is set at by FanDuel and other places, other bookmakers out there, is what it's set at. And remember, they can be different for different books, but that's the second variable. And then the third variable is how I talked about a consensus power ranking. So using the three of the most predictive preseason power rankings that are out there. This is leveraging someone else's work. Phil Steele, right? The ESPN FBI, Kelly Ford, right? So averaging those numbers to determine what the power ranking is for each team is used for two things. It's used for creating schedule strength, and it's used for a tiebreaker variable that says, do they think they're going to be better than they finished last year or worse than they finished last year? Now, where does it get that value for where it finished last year? That's where we use the DPS numbers. Our our average GSA number is our power ranking. It's an adjusted opponent adjusted efficiency number, and it's a power ranking that we use to say how strong that team was. Schedule, the schedule is irrelevant. It's power ranking. So 3 variables we're using, right? And we'll get to those with some graphics here in just a minute. So here's how we graph it. We're going to take these two. We're going to take the 2 variables. How tough is your schedule? And remember, this is FBS Power 4. Only FBS Power 4, right? So there's 68 Power 4 teams. So if you look at this graph right here, see how the tougher arrow goes to the right, the x-axis starting at the center point, that is team number 34, right? Team number 34 in schedule toughness, and then way over to the right would be team number 1, the toughest schedule. So toughness is increasing as you go to the right. As you go to the left, it's getting easier. That means the teams on the left side their schedule is below the midpoint. They're 35th in schedule strength, 36th, 37th, on all the way out to number 68, which is the 68 teams in the Power 4 for 2025, right? That's the x-axis, right? The y-axis going upwards is, remember I talked about how many wins are projected compared to how many wins you had last year, right? And these are regular season wins. How many regular season wins are projected compared to how many you won last year, right? And then, so going up, the y-axis are teams that are being projected to have more wins than they had last year. Going down the y-axis, teams that are projected to have less wins than they had last year. So those are those 2 variables being put on this chart right here. And then if we go on to the next one, I'm only going to talk about 2 quadrants today. That upper right quadrant, the lower left quadrant. Upper right quadrant says tougher schedule, but more wins, right? Tougher schedule, but more wins. So these are teams that the odds makers are giving more wins in 2025 than they had in 2024. They're giving them more wins than they had in 2025 than they had in 2024, despite the fact that they've got one of the tougher schedules in the FBS, right? Their schedule is top half of the FBS. So that's the first upper right-hand quadrant, right? That's quadrant 1. That's what I call Q1, quadrant 1. The schedule's tougher than the other half of the FBS, or the Power 4, excuse me. The schedule is in the toughest half of the Power 4. But the odds makers are saying you're going to get more wins. And of course, quadrant number 4 would be the other quadrant that says your schedule's easier than the other half of the FBS, but we're going to give you less wins anyways, right? So your schedule's easy, but you're getting less wins. That's quadrant 4 in this graph, right? So you would plot all 68 teams, figure out which quadrant they fall in, and that's where I use the tiebreaker. That third variable I told you about is the tiebreaker, because what you would want to do here is, if their schedule is tougher but they're predicting to have more wins, then they better be projected to be a much better team in 2025 than they were in 2024. Does that make sense? Because if they're not projected to be a much better team than they were in 2024, that screams under. That screams bet the under on their win total, right? So I'm only going to focus on teams that are plus 2.5 wins or more above, or 2.5 wins or negative 2.5 wins or less on the quadrant 4. So trying to slow down here. If their schedule is tougher, but they're predicting you to have 2.5 more wins than you had last year, well, you better be a much better team. So that's where we go on to the next phase, which is the 2 teams that fall in that category. Only 2 teams fell in the category of more than 2.5 wins or more projected better than they won in 2025. And that is Auburn Tigers from the SEC and Purdue Boilermakers from the Big Ten. Those are 2 teams. They're not the only teams that have 2.5 wins, but they're the only teams in quadrant number 1 that have 2.5 wins more projected than they had last year. So looking real quick, Auburn had 5 wins last year. They're projecting them to win 7.5. Their over/under win total is 7.5. So that's where we get to that third variable, which is off-season composite power ranking delta, right? So it's kind of what I made up, the OCPD, OCPD, the off-season composite power ranking delta, right? Which is the composite of, I talked about Phil Steele, the FPI, Kelly Ford. Where do these folks predict Auburn to finish in 2025 in terms of a power ranking? A power ranking is used for betting. That is used for betting. That is actual strength of a team, is their power ranking. And then you throw the schedule in as how are they going to perform against that schedule, is what we watch the games. That's the reason we watch the games. Otherwise, you just let a computer figure stuff out, and wouldn't be much fun. It's how you're going to perform based on your talent, right? So the things that Phil Steele and the FPI and Kelly Ford have looked at, right? They've done all that homework for me, the DPS, because I don't do that kind of stuff. I don't project how good this 5-star that's coming in is going to be, right? They do. They project returning production, coaching changes, new recruits, off-season injuries, all these kind of things. They project where that team's power ranking is going to be, and of course, in modern era football, a big one, the transfer portal, right? Transfers in, transfers out. So that all gets wrapped up into one number from Phil Steele, one number from Kelly Ford, one number from the FPI. We composite, we average those numbers together. Where are those guys going to wind up? Where is their true power ranking for the preseason? It's a projected power ranking, right? We don't know if it's going to be true or not. It's a projection, but they've done the homework. We count on these people, these excellent podcasters out there that are making lots of money doing it, to do that homework, right? And so where are they projecting you to finish compared to where you finished last year is the tiebreaker. So if we look at If we look at Auburn, let's start with Auburn. Okay, so the off-season composite power ranking delta between where they finished, according to the DPS, where did they finish last year in our power ranking, and where does the composite power ranking say they're going to be? That's a plus 21.3 for Auburn. Plus 21.3. If you've got a plus 21.3, that means that the experts believe you're going to be a much improved team. Your power ranking is risen by 21 positions from where you finished last year. So, what we're looking for, I told you this before, what you would be looking for in this quadrant, because the schedules are so much more difficult in this quadrant than the rest of the FBS, you would be wanting to look out for an under situation where a team is either worse, projected to be worse than last year, or maybe just about the same as last year, and yet their schedule is really tough and their win delta is high. We don't have that case here. So in the case of both, Purdue, who's projected to be 28.3 positions higher finishing this year than where they finished in 2024. That's a massive upgrade for Purdue. So that the experts are saying Purdue is going to improve a lot this year in terms of power ranking. So those are no plays. We don't want to play any unders, and you don't want to play overs here. You don't necessarily want to play an over here either, because they're in quadrant 1, right? So you don't want to play an over. So that's a no play. Those two teams are a no play. All right, so that's quadrant 1. We examined two teams in quadrant number 1, and neither one of them we want to make a play on. So that leaves us with quadrant number 4, and we've got 3 teams in quadrant number 4, right? Indiana on the left has the worst schedule of the 3 teams. SMU the second worst schedule, and Duke the third worst schedule, 56th, 57th, 64th, right? Or out of 68 teams in the Power 4. So Purdue, only 4 teams have a easier schedule. There's no such thing to me as an easy schedule, but Indiana has a 64th ranked schedule out of 68 Power 4 teams, right? So in this quadrant, you would be looking for an overplay. So the odds makers are projecting them to lose 2.5 games more than they lost last year, despite the fact that they've got an easy schedule. Those are contradictory, right? Lose 2.5 more games, but you got one of the easiest schedules in the land as far as Power 4 goes. So the third thing, the tiebreaker, comes into play in that case. And what do the experts think? And in this case, the experts think Indiana's going to be much worse than they were last year, 15 positions down in power ranking compared to where they were last year. There's no overplay here. You're not going to play an under for Indiana. You're not going to play an under, but you're not going to play because you don't play an under because their schedule's so easy, right? And they're 2.5 games already projected below, so you're not going to go under, and you're also not going to go over on Indiana because the experts are saying they're going to be a worse team, so you can't go over. But if you look at SMU and Duke, right, also projected to have 2.5 less wins this year than they had last year in the regular season. Their schedules are light, also 57th and 56th, but they're not projected to be worse teams. In SMU's case, they're projected to be exactly the same kind of team they were last year, in the finishing position in power ranking as they were last year, and they have an easy schedule, relative easy schedule, and they're down 2.5 wins, right? Duke, easy-ish schedule, 2.5 win projected down, but they're actually an improved team. This one screams, right? So if we go on to the next one, those two teams are the ones that you say, wait a minute here, what's going on with these two guys? Projected to be down 2.5 more, have 2.5 more losses than they had in 2024, despite an easy schedule and a team whose power ranking is either the same or much improved compared to last year. Those three things don't jive, and therefore we play an over on those two teams, right? So that's the play. Kind of our little weird analytical approach. Now, you would have loved to have done this before the markets matured, right? You wanted to get in early on these numbers. And that's what the smart bettors do. They get in early on these numbers. This was done to show you how you would do it if you got in late. If you got in late to the market, this is one method to possibly try to figure out who to play. I have made this play on Duke. Unfortunately, the bookie I use because of where I live. See this? Because of where I live, there's only one place I can legally bet. Because of that, they didn't have SMU, so I could not bet the SMU over, but I did bet the Duke over. Unfortunately, it's at this point with the mature market, it's juiced pretty heavily, but I still made the bet. So Duke over is the play. That's it. That was fun. It was a fun little experiment, playing around with figuring out schedule strengths and trying to use an analytical approach to how we would determine which teams to bet on. That's all I got for this episode of the DPS All Football Talk Rodcast. I am Dan DeSeto. We will be back whenever we decide we have content to share, or if not, week 0. Before week 0, we'll have a couple of plays for week 0, and we'll see you then. Have a good one.